I'm a big believer in universal law, which, a lot of times people hear different bits of Hermetic principles. One example is as above, so below, which is really the idea that everything in our external reality is a reflection of what's going on inside of us. And when I think about sustainability, again, oftentimes people just think about environmental sustainability, some of the work we're doing in solar, but, really I see it as we're not going to solve any of these problems in our external reality until we start to go inside and work on our own personal shit.
Welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. In the Champions Corner edition, I'm Mike Deaton, and together with Lydia, my co-host in life, business, and this podcast, we're taking you into the training room, deep in the dojo, sharing the secrets of what it takes to forge a champion. We're digging deep into mindset mastery, high-performance habits, best-in-class behaviors, and bringing you the tips and techniques that maximize human potential, brought to you from some of the best in the business.
So grab your buds and your seat. Hit subscribe and get ready to up your game. Let's do the show.
Let's do it. In the Champions Corner today, we go deep with a fascinating spirit who's had an amazing journey.
As someone who survived 5 heart surgeries before he was 18 years old, he has a unique perspective and has chosen to see life through the lens of togetherness and sustainability.
Dakota Malone was drawn to entrepreneurship at an early age, and he's now forging a path in the commercial solar energy space. His company, Community Solar Authority, helps large consumers of electricity find solutions to improve revenue and trim expenses through enhanced sustainability programs. Dakota, however, sees sustainability through a much broader perspective, taking into account the environment, society, and capitalism all together. He's a curious soul, and we also had the opportunity to discuss spirituality, shamanism, alternative healing practices, in addition to his business venture.
We had a lot of fun in this episode and know you'll have some great takeaways too. Let's get into Champions Corner with Dakota Malone.
Dakota Malone, welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. We're excited to have you on and hear a little bit more about your story.
Yes, welcome.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So these one-on-one in the Champions Corner episodes, as we call them, we talk a little bit about mindset, best-in-class behaviors. We can get into some of your professional vocation as well, and how that weaves into your life story, because it sounds like it does. But why don't you give us some background about where you've come from and what's led you to what you're doing today? Really
Sure.
Short question, I'm sure, but
yeah, I'll give the syntax version of it. So I tell people that, I was born between 2 cornfields in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. So when I tell people I'm from New York, they, ask what part of the city. And there's always arguments about what is upstate New York. I'm from central New York, which is really closer to Canada than anything. And, since then I've moved 41 times over the course of my life. I just recently turned 30, and most of that was for work. A little bit was for pleasure. And, really it was just a result of my childhood. And so really quick, I'm someone who's thriving post 5 heart surgeries. I had 2 as soon as I was born, really just emergency surgeries to save my life. I had 3 in high school, technically 2 in high school. And then I had my 5th and final open heart surgery a week after I graduated high school. And really for me, sustainability was really bedrocked into my life from a young age. Dying multiple times, going through pretty traumatic physical experiences. And for me, that really just made me realize the importance of life, the importance of every day. And I also have a rebellious personality. So when my doctors told me and my parents told me, like, don't go outside, don't breathe too hard, don't go anywhere, don't work out, I pretty much did the complete opposite and tried to get as far away as I could as soon as I had the ability to. But, really growing up, I had a somewhat sheltered life because of that. And I was, just still in high school, rolling burritos as my first kind of job and learning these customer service skills, which is interesting because I was just doing some volunteering recently, and it was for some older youth in the foster care system in Missouri. And we were talking about the importance of skill stacking. And how I shared my story about how, my first job, I was rolling burritos. My very first check was for $88, and I thought I was the richest dude on the planet. I thought I had life figured out. I was driving my mom's van to work, And really what that led into was another job waiting tables where I was then earning tips. And I was like, man, I'm really growing here. But ultimately, my path started towards entrepreneurship when I saw my best friend he was posting checks on Facebook saying, look how much money I'm making. And he was a bit younger than me. I want to say he was just 18 years old. I was 19 and he was making like $1,000 a week. And to me, I was like, man, that's crazy money. And I was like, I don't care what you're doing. I want to come do it with you. And he's like, oh, you won't really like it. We're doing door-to-door sales. And I was like, dude, I'm getting in that van and you could drive me wherever. I want to make $1,000 a week. And so that's really how my career started. And that was in the energy space. And so literally on my third day, we were in downtown Albany, New York, which is the state capital. We were knocking doors on some of the most dangerous streets in Albany at the time. And I had zero sales experience, a little bit of customer service skills when I got a phone call from my dad. And my dad worked at a manufacturing plant in my hometown. And he basically called me and said, Dakota, you can quit your job. You don't have to knock doors anymore. I got you lined up with a job with my work and you can come home. And really, this was like a fork in the road moment in my life, which is pretty, common for entrepreneurs when you think about, how I look at them as opportunity vehicles. Is I had this one opportunity vehicle that was filled with mystery, excitement, and I had no real reason to believe I was going to be good at door-to-door sales. I ended up telling my dad, like, hey, look, I think I just want to explore this opportunity instead. For me, it was a way out of my hometown. It was a way out of monotony. And it was a way into a life of adventure. We were traveling around. There was the opportunity for growth. And I could make a lot of money really working on my own time as a 1099 contractor. So, the story ends with me telling my dad, like, hey, look, I think I'm just going to knock doors instead. He was very upset with me and, shared some choice words. And ultimately, I kind of just put my foot in the ground and said, I wanted to blaze my own trail, which was really important for me. And so, I was in the energy space doing direct sales, worked my way up. Within the next 5 years, 2016, I was the number one door-to-door salesperson in the world for this Fortune 500 energy company. And turns out I was really good at door-to-door sales. And, that brought me all over the country, moving around, but really having an understanding, going back to the skill stacking of, customer service, direct sales skills, communication, leadership. All of these skills started to stack. And I knew that one day I wanted to quit. I wanted to step into my own work, become an entrepreneur. I was the kid in high school Googling careers where I could make six figures without a college degree. And, at the time I ended up handing my parents my 2-year degree, told them to leave me alone. I'm going to get into business and, went on and did all this door-to-door sales stuff. And so, 2017, I actually made a complete pivot. My best friend called me up. He basically double dog dared me to quit my job, everything I was doing, and moved to Italy with him because he was in the Air Force as a K-9 officer. And so I did. I quit my job and I was really committed to working remote. And I share this story in length just as a point because I know that you have a lot of people interested in mindset and entrepreneurship on this show. And really for me, it was about, okay, I have this opportunity. I was making thousands and thousands of dollars a week just knocking on doors, but I could only make money when I was putting the time in or when my team was. And for me, that was an issue because I no longer wanted to trade my time for money. I realized at that age, I was probably 24 at the time, 23. I realized the importance of being able to trade that off. And so I was dealing with a lot of chronic pain just because of I also have scoliosis. I was left with a lot of chronic pain from my heart surgeries, and going up and down steps every day doing door to door was actually really draining on me. Despite health and fitness being a number one area of my life and something I care deeply about as far as those principles of sustainability, what I was doing was not sustainable. So I made the pivot, I moved to Italy, and I was really committed to just how do I build a business off of my laptop? At the time I was reading, I've got a lot of books. I was reading The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. Yeah. And I said, hey, that sounds like a good idea.
Who doesn't want to work 4 hours a week? Yeah.
And, I was really committed to it. And so at the time I had all this money saved up. I invested in Bitcoin and just other cryptocurrency in 2017 when Bitcoin was $4,000, something like that. And so, I made a pretty lucky bet, I'll call it. But that aside, I was just learning what skills do I need? How do I take the skills that I have, turn it into entrepreneurship and put it in an opportunity vehicle where I can make money when I'm not actually working? And that's what really birthed what I'm doing today, which is, I've co-founded a company called Community Solar Authority. My company serves as consultants to some of the most significant solar developers in the country. And really, we have a streamlined interest in deploying access to renewables specifically for large users of electricity. So we work with national brands, corporations, municipalities, and we help them improve their operating profits by lowering electricity costs. Oftentimes, it's coming on a $0 investment just by leveraging available incentives from a state and federal level. And that's really what we're doing today. And that may look like all different areas of commercial solar. That looks like on-site solar, where we're installing it on top of carports and roofs. That may look like off-site solar, where we work with multifamilies and help them connect to off-site solar farms as a way to lower operating costs. But then we're also doing solar leasing, where we help landowners convert their raw land into passive income. We're actually co-developing a lot of these commercial solar assets, which are, from an investor's perspective, really just a long-term annuity, and they're amazing cash flowing assets as the clean energy economy, which is now in the trillions of dollars, starts to really build. And for me, I just went from the door-to-door sales in the energy space, saw the writing on the wall and the job security with the renewable energy growth in that industry, and I really haven't looked back since. So I know that was kind of a long intro as far as like who I am and what I'm doing, but I hope it laid some good context for the call.
No, it's great. It's fantastic. So much to unpack in all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was scribbling down some notes as you were going, so I didn't forget a few things. But yeah, really incredible journey. It sounds like from birth. And so, what's the specific condition that you have or had that required surgeries? Was it a hole in your heart or?
So I was born with something called aortic valve stenosis, which is, your aortic valve is the largest valve in your heart, and it's the one that pumps all the blood to the body. And for me, I was born with a narrow valve. And so my very first surgery was just like a simple ablation. They went in through my wrist, and it's like a balloon surgery. So they went and popped it, and they actually broke my aortic valve. And so it started leaking blood back into my heart. And so my second surgery was an attempt to fix it. It didn't really work. They went in through my back. And I basically grew up going to the cardiologist once a year, and they're like, hey, when you stop growing, we'll be able to fix this problem, and we'll be able to replace your valve. In between that, in the middle of high school, I woke up with an unrelated heart condition in the middle of the night, and semi unrelated. I woke up with a very rapid heartbeat, which I learned was called tachycardia. And there was a whole journey around this where basically I would wake up, my heart would flutter very fast. It was very uncomfortable for 2 to 10 minutes at a time, maybe once a month ish. And I could never get to the hospital in time for them to diagnose it and see what was wrong. And one day, I was 16 years old. I was managing my high school's baseball team because I couldn't play sports. And, my tachycardia started, 5 minutes turned into 20 turned into an hour. By, the time I was 90 minutes in, my heart rate was 214 for basically 2.5 hours. I was in the ER at 16 years old. The ER was packed. I had to share a room with a guy because the rooms were so full. He died of a heart attack next to me because the doctors chose to work on my life instead. I remember them smashing my face into buckets of ice, trying to slow my heart rate down. Wow. And, I was 16 years old when the doctors walked in, and my dad and my grandfather were there, and they're like, Dakota, we have to shut off your heart. And to me at 16, I was like, man, and I already felt like I was going to die because my calories were being eaten up by a rapid heartbeat. It was just, I had nothing left in the tank. And, I kind of just accepted it and said, okay, cool. I guess that's that. And, obviously I didn't die. Although, they had to shut off my heart, and technically I've been dead, multiple times. They pumped what's called adenosine into an IV. And really that's a crazy feeling because it basically sucks, your, extremities all into your heart, and then your heart resets. So I went from a 214 heart rate to just 74 resting heart rate in 1 second. And I had to do that a few times before they kind of figured out what was going on. I had another surgery basically to fix it. My cells had made an extra pathway, so my blood was, being recycled into my heart, which caused the rapid heartbeat. And so I got that stuff fixed, went in for another surgery to just check the pressures of my valves because they were being overworked because my aortic valve was under performing. And they're like, look, you got to go get an emergency heart surgery as soon as you graduate. And so that's what kind of led into my fifth and final open heart surgery, which had I been able to wait a year, they wouldn't have had to break any of my ribs and do any of that. They can just basically do that through your arteries in your legs now, which is crazy. Yeah. But, I ended up having the open heart, and that really set up, my life for really thinking about sustainability, how I want to stick around for the long term, what's really important in life, and, what all of that means to me. And I think that the big mission and kind of purpose of my life, I think, is to inspire other people. And I share my story as a source for inspiration. I told this story just last week for the Mila grads, which was the older youth in the foster care. It was like a leadership program. And, I said, hey, look, I wasn't in foster care. I can't relate to a lot of the stories that you guys carry with you, but I can tell you how my story and the way that I shaped the meaning of my life really dictated and determined my outcomes. And I think that's one of the most important things that people can walk away with, is that it really doesn't freaking matter what your story is. It's what it means to you and the way that you talk about it. And, I had mentioned kind of before we jumped on the live, is that I started to study a lot of hypnosis and NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And really all that means is just the power of our language. And I believe that words are spelling, and, it's really magic, the language that we use and the words that we choose to speak. And when we can kind of hand tailor that into a story that empowers us, I think that's one of the most important things we can do for ourselves as humans. And it's a really big concept that I like to teach as far as like human sustainability and, living an empowered life.
Mm. Yeah, it's incredible. Your story, that is, NLP and hypnosis are as well. But that's exactly where I wanted to go with that question, was related to your outlook on life and the way you put it, having this viewpoint of sustainability. I was curious if that embedded as a toddler or a child, or it sounds like maybe more as a teenager, and some of your later surgeries is where you had more profound thoughts about this, lifestyle of sustainability and making an impact and things like that. Is that kind of the way I'm reading that correctly?
Yeah. I had no idea going, through the childhood development aspect of it, what my life was going to look like. But for me now, kind of going from a young adult to an adult, I see those heart surgeries as initiations. And, just my personal viewpoint of the world, I study shamanic medicine, which, was really just through the initiations that I had. And so I continue to practice those, death, rebirth cycles and ceremonies in my personal life, just because they've brought me so much actual medicine and so much meaning into my life. And so for me, that's exactly how I look at it. I'm a big believer in universal law, which, a lot of times people hear different bits of Hermetic principles. One example is as above, so below, which is really the idea that everything in our external reality is a reflection of what's going on inside of us. And when I think about sustainability, again, oftentimes people just think about environmental sustainability, or, some of the work we're doing in solar. But, really, I see it as we're not going to solve any of these problems in our external reality until we start to go inside and work on our own personal shit. And so that's part of like the inspiration, is that I do these incredibly difficult initiations, and then I come back and just try to share them with the world, because, despite how hard they are, I always tell people, not only is courage calling and you need to pick up the phone, but inside of our darkest caves as humans, as the darkest parts of our psyche, those hold the greatest treasure. And when you're willing to go into those, that may be the scariest thing, that you've ever done in your life, oftentimes, as long as you prepare the right way, you're able to come out as a more initiated human being. And to me, I just think that's the most important thing we can do as humans, as individuals. And that's really how I try to live my life, and just set a good example of being that.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yes.
I resonate with a lot of that. A lot of that's intriguing to me. And I like to explore some of those concepts and thoughts as well. But particularly in our Western society, I think we get, let's say, we kind of get pushed down a path or a normalcy that's not that. That's, consumerism and materialism. And there, at least I don't think traditionally there has been in, a certain segment of time, this calling to introspect and to self-realize and to think about life in an interconnected way. It's been a lot about, me and my ego type things. So it's interesting to kind of hear you talk about that. You're a good generation younger than me. I wonder if you see things differently, if you see an opening in society, however gradual or whatever, a movement towards a little more of that. And you probably do, because it sounds like you're centering yourself a little bit in that space. But
Totally.
yeah, just kind of curious your viewpoint on that.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because, one of my initiations a couple of years ago was I did a 10-day ayahuasca initiation in the jungles of Colombia.
Uh-huh.
And, really how I'm seeing it now is that the medicine coming from the jungle specifically is really starting to break through into the Western culture. And I think that really it's all in its own timeline. And I think as, more and more chaos comes into the world, again, in our external reality, everywhere you look, especially in the media, we're sold, fear, doubt, and worry. And again, I just think that the way that I experience it in my body when I go through these death rebirth cycles is that rebirths are messy. And so just like all of the chaos happening in the world, I think that we're actually going through this greater rebirth timeline. And, again, this is just personal opinion and how I see it, just from experimenting and working with, different types of plant-based medicines. I think that there is more awareness around it. And I always share that with people. I want to write a book on it, and I would title it Step One is Awareness, because you can't really release or heal or change anything that you don't have awareness of. And so, that's the very first step. And you can look at that for anything. It doesn't have to be like a healing conversation. It could be for entrepreneurs looking to really build a business and become a better, more empowered entrepreneur. You really don't know what to work on until you sit down and you start to get awareness around it. Right. What am I good at? What am I not good at? Really doing like a SWOT analysis. And it's really just that simple. And I think the more awareness that you have, the more you're able to kind of expand. And with that expansion comes like new thoughts, new energy, new flows of movement. And that's how I've done it as far as wanting to make my ceilings my floor, as we kind of call it, which are to really step outside of yourself, grow beyond what you thought was possible, and then really enter a new realm. And, that's really all I've tried to do. Again, coming from a small town where, there's a stat that can basically say the zip code that you live in and you grew up in will determine how financially prosper you are, your financial prosperity. And that really bothered me as a kid because I didn't have any neighbors. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. I went to a poor school, and I was like, that's not going to be my life. Yeah. And in order to really grow beyond that, you literally have to grow up. And that's not just growing up on a cycle because, most people live the same 6 months of their life all the way until, their death, and they never really change. And for me, I've always just thought about, okay, what do I actually need to grow through in order to become someone different? And so those are a couple of my initial thoughts around that.
Yeah. Interesting.
I really love the fact that you use the word initiated, humans initiated. Obviously, it seems like you don't use the words very random. And that very word assumes that the journey is not complete. You are initiating a certain journey. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on that?
Yeah. When I think about initiations, I think about a few different, another word that comes up is integration. And I was just sharing a couple of top books that I, kind of recommend to people. And one of them was by a gentleman named Bill Plotkin. And he wrote a book called Crossing the Boundaries Between Nature and Psyche. And it's super interesting. And it's really about that as above, so below concept, which is, when you get out in nature. So for example, another initiation I did last year or attempted to do and I failed was 4 days, no food, no water, no word in the middle of the forest. And I was also naked. So I was naked in the middle of the woods and I hung up a hammock. And, really this was another shamanic medicine practice. And this initiation is all about really stepping into nature. And what you realize is that when you're not talking, when you're fasted, and when you're not taking in water, all of a sudden your body starts to shut down and you become way more open and aware of what's actually around you. And again, where do you draw the line between what is me as an individual and what is nature as outside of ourselves? And one of the things that I've realized through my practices and initiations is that, of course, it's all interconnected. And so I think that part of the initiation process is really learning to integrate and understand that we are nature, and nature is really just consciousness evolving. And again, this is just my own personal interpretation. I grew up Catholic, and post 5 heart surgeries, a lot of my life started to change. And this is just what I found that works for me and that what makes sense to me. Because when I go through these initiations, and especially when I'm working with different types of medicines, whether that's, ayahuasca, mushrooms, tobacco, even something like cacao, which is just chocolate. Cacao has a very resonance tone to it where when you are using your intention, which is, the intention is where your attention goes, the energy flows. And so if you sit with something as simple as cacao, there's no psychedelics in it, but you sit with it. It has a very grandmother-like energy to it. And you can actually work with these plants, build relationships with them, and again, really start to expand the belief of who you are. Mm-hmm. And that's really how I think about initiations, is like a remembrance process. And it really is never done. I think the ultimate remembrance process is one day, the pendulum's going to swing back. We're going to go from all of this dividedness and all of this unconnectedness, and we're going to go back into unity consciousness. And, that's my interpretation. And so that's really how I look at initiations.
Interesting. There's a book called The Fourth Turning. I haven't read it yet, but it talks about generational periodization, and how we go through these cycles, very much the way you're describing, where there's very predictable cycles when you look at humanity, and even beyond humanity, in terms of the earth, the cyclical nature of how things have played out. And there is a viewpoint that we go through all of this mess and chaos, or what appears to be chaotic, and a pendulum is a great analogy as well, where we go to a certain extreme, and then things rebalance out in a different way. I think it's very I think it's within our nature, and just the way things happen in cycles in that way. But it's that resonates a lot with me in terms of consciousness evolution. I do think there is already a movement towards viewing things in a more interconnected way. How we're not just humans on a planet; we're a part of an ecosystem, and it all works together. Yes. And all of even the man-made elements of it all, right? I mean, it's all part of a system, and it's working together. And we may not understand it completely, but it's just a matter of fact that it's all kind of working together. Mm-hmm. I think you touched on it earlier, but you talked about these 4 pillars that you have in terms of sustainability, and being more than just what people would think about in terms of a solar array on our roof that's producing green energy or more sustainable type of energy. You want to expand on your kind of your viewpoint on sustainability at a broader level?
Yeah, happy to. And this is something that is deemed a bunch of different words. Some people call it the 3 Ps, which is, people, prosperity, and planet. And I look at it through the lens of the 4 pillars, which are human, social, business, or economic, and environmental. And like you had mentioned, Mike, a lot of people hear sustainability and they're like, ESG, government pressure, and there's like all of these negative connotations to it. And for me, I really just, it's just, sustainability has been bedrocked into my life since childhood. And I'm a big believer in just educating people on it. And, we run a sustainability business. I consider myself a sustainability entrepreneur, but we try to also practice what we preach and live by these sustainability principles inside our business. So again, I think human sustainability is all about empowerment. And at an individual level, it's how do we operate and move through the world, whether that's our mindset, what we're focused on, what it means to us, what we believe. All of these really can determine how sustainable of a human being you are. And again, that term is used as a way to look at a lot of people live their lives. They tell themselves the same sad story of disempowerment. They blame everybody else for why their life is terrible. And they may live till the 79-year mark, which is like the average American male. But how sustainable was their life in terms of how empowered were they? How much of an impact did they have? How much did they show up to life? And again, I believe that life is all energy. And it's how much energy did you actually capitalize on? And so that's how I look at human sustainability. And then social is just, of course, these come into the equity conversations, which are how do we take care of the most vulnerable parts of our society? Social sustainability is really about showing up and, potentially doing volunteering or really thinking about the greater community. And so for us, we do a lot of work in the social sustainability sector. We partner with nonprofits. So for example, we help many nonprofits benefit from available commercial solar incentives. A lot of times the incentives are aligned where they can claim even more. So again, like typically it may be like a 10 to 20% discount when you're signing up for something called community solar. But in certain states like Illinois, we helped the housing authority claim a 50% discount on their electricity costs, which ended up saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it didn't cost them anything. And so I look at social sustainability through the lens of like, okay, how can we help and make a positive impact on the nonprofits, the people taking care of the vulnerable, parts of our society, and really bringing equity into the conversation. And then, of course, business and economic sustainability is like, we founded Community Solar Authority on a thesis, which was like, the more sustainable your organization is, the more likely it is to remain in business over the long haul. And that may sound like common sense, but again, when people think about sustainability, they're not thinking about building a sustainable business model. A lot of times corporations are just trying to blaze, scorched earth to an IPO so they can make a bunch of money. And sure, that may be a strategy, but is that like a long-term sustainable business model? And the answer is no. And of course, you can zoom down and look at that on a micro level to the solarpreneurs, investors, and really looking at, how sustainable is my business? What does that look like from an SOP perspective? I recently went on a manufacturing podcast and we talked about the idea that so many people are retiring every single day from the baby boomer class. And oftentimes, like my dad works in manufacturing, he's been there for 38 years and he's about to retire. I don't think they've written down any SOPs or anything that he's learned and launched at that company, which has led to $1 billion in revenue. He built massive parts of this manufacturing plant. It's a company called Novelis. They're one of the largest aluminum recycling plants in the world. And he was really a part of launching a whole new product suite for Novelis. And it's like, if that wasn't written down, that person retires and then all of a sudden that is lost knowledge. That is not a sustainable business practice. And so that's really how we look at that, is through like lean principles, et cetera. And then of course, environmental and sustainability kind of go hand in hand with people's, kind of mind maps here. And, for us, that's working in the world of commercial solar, but it can look like a lot of different opportunities, which could be like strategic partnerships, for example. That's a really big actual business sustainability practice of ours. We grew our entire business model off of finding strategic partners that had our ideal clients in their book of business. And then we deliver our value through their bridge, which is the relationship they have with the client. We call this the synergy bridge. And, our job is to just truck as much value across that bridge as possible. So our strategic partners look like a hero. They naturally keep their clients longer. They get to generate additional revenue. That is a massive business sustainability practice that anybody can do and 10x their business. Maybe not overnight, but within a year, you can absolutely 10x your business that way. And so, we do it through the lens of commercial solar. Of course, there are many other opportunities, but that's kind of like the baseline of how I look at the 4 pillars of sustainability.
Yeah, I love that. It's very holistic in nature. Circling back to the social and the equity piece, reminded me. Last year, I read a book by Peter Singer called "The Life You Can Save." I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
No.
It's a brilliant book. It's I think you can go to the lifeyoucansave.org and he'll give it for free, or it's also an audiobook format as a podcast or something. But he's a philosopher. He teaches, but he's also the book's kind of a debate style about the benefits of taking care of the needy, who are the most needy, all those kind of things. So I highly encourage to check that one out if it's down your lane, and it sounds like it is. I'd like to kind of shift the conversation a little bit more towards the business side of things and understand, a little bit more about what you do and with your company today, and how that feeds back into all these pillars. I'm really taken by your awakening or your curiosity at an early age about trading time for money and looking at different ways to create all that, and then ultimately getting into entrepreneurship in this way. It's as somebody who came to it later in life, I was in manufacturing for decades, and so I resonate with a lot of the people IP that comes along in there, and that you know, people leave and you lose it, and just all of that. I mean, there was a movement definitely to capture all that with lean practices and all of that, but in your business. Help me understand a little bit more. It sounds like you're kind of a broker or a service connecting people. They may or may not be looking for this type of service, but at least kind of being a conduit for and helping people find available incentives and different programs that are out there with use cases. Is that kind of how I'm understanding?
Yeah. And, client facing and kind of front facing of our business, I just tell people, we run a commercial solar brokerage at a national level. That's like the one sentence, kind of explainer to what we're doing. And that's right, Mike. That's exactly what we're doing is, we work with large users of electricity, some of the largest in the country, and we help them capture and unlock available commercial solar incentives. And for us, we're really more of a media company and consulting group where there is a strategy. It just so happens that we're partnered with and consult for some of the most significant solar developers in the country, and we're co-developing with some of the biggest in the world. And so we leverage, our access we have to their resources and really just serve as a bridge to, help our end users unlock some of those incentives in a meaningful way. And so again, that could look like on-site solar, where we're actually, like for example, we're working with a mall in Rhode Island, one of the largest in Providence, and it's 25 acres of parking lot. And we're going to turn it into what I call a sustainable urban oasis, where we are going to do 25 acres of carports that are going to have EV, the snow and ice, removal is going to be taken care of. It's going to provide shaded parking for the cars. And so people are going to be able to drive in, and all of the economics show that people like to support organizations that are practicing sustainability. And so they'll be using it from a revenue generation model because they're just leasing their parking lots to us to co-develop and build these sites. But the customers are looking at it as, wow, these guys care about the environment. We're able to drive in. Of course, as EV vehicles kind of become more and more popular, they're going to be able to capitalize on that stuff. So there's on-site solutions that include the solar leasing, but then there's also off-site solutions, which, I guess like for another example, we're also working with a different mall. This is one of the top 5 largest malls in the country, and they do not have an appetite to install solar on site, but they want to benefit from available incentives. And, I know you guys do a lot of real estate. This is our bread and butter. It's called community solar, which is the idea that there are these shared solar farms on typically, 30 to 50 acres. And we specifically work with the large users, which are the anchor tenants. So very similar to a strip mall. You have a Walmart or a Target that's an anchor tenant, and then a bunch of smaller stores as backfill. Solar farms work the same exact way. We put large users of electricity on these solar farms as anchor tenants. In exchange for helping clean the energy grid, they receive a bill credit on their utility bill as a way to lower electricity costs. So the windup in the pitch to what we do is like, hey, you're using a lot of electricity on a $0 investment without installing solar on site. We can help you improve operating profits by lowering your electricity costs with this program. Sound fair? And, that's what we do at a national level. And so we're working with, multi-billion-dollar, international transportation companies, global hospitality groups. We're doing one of the largest municipal water authorities in the country right now. And so we've got a lot of exciting deal flow, but then, like at a regional level, we're working with and I guess this is like a funny example. This guy owns like $1 billion worth of real estate, and he's got a multifamily property, but it's all on one electricity meter. So he's got I don't even know how many tenants because it's a massive electric bill, but it's all on a single bill. Yeah. And so, we're looking at that with the same exact way we look at, the international transportation company we're working with, who sent us 1,800 utility bills that we had to go through and kind of put into an Excel spreadsheet, which was not fun. This one's a lot easier because it's just one bill, and it works the same exact way. They can participate. They can help clean the local energy grids. And really, in exchange, it works just like a coupon. So every time you pay your electric bill, there's a little coupon attached that takes a 10% discount off. And without having to install it, without having to make an investment, they can benefit from the clean energy economy. And so those are just like a couple examples of solar, offsite solar, and solar leasing. Sorry, someone was trying to call me.
No, that's okay.
Sounds like it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, which is, the idea of strategic partnerships, just because I see it as something that we've done to grow our business, but we call it triple win synergy. So we're able to fill our solar farms. The end user is able to benefit from lower electricity costs in a meaningful way without having to make an investment. And the strategic partner is able to look like a hero for recommending us. They're naturally keeping their clients longer because of the value that they're adding. And we do a revenue share model, which just, is a business sustainability practice where if someone's going to bring us their clients, we're going to do a share of the revenue for them so that they're more likely to stick around and use us for the long term. And that's how we build out these really massive long-term partnerships. And, we're a lean business, which, I said we kind of practice what we preach. We have 0 employees. It's myself, my 2 other co-founders, and we have a lot of strategic partnerships in our network, which allows us to get a national reach in all of these, multi-billion-dollar corporations and companies and municipalities that look to us, and of course we have the good branding, Community Solar Authority. We're helping these people with the community solar program. And so it all kind of worked out, but yeah, absolutely. It's a win for everybody involved.
Yeah, it's sustainable in that way. Let's explore a couple of those. So one, I'm curious about solar farms where you're using land instead of on building mounts or anything like that, and or just like we deal in land as one of our businesses, and we hear a lot of people talk about the benefits of solar farming. I'm just curious. What are we can either talk about it in terms of what are the constraints, or we can talk about it and what opens it up in terms of, like you mentioned, a Walmart. How far away could that solar farm be before it becomes maybe the business case doesn't work? Also with just land, like if we have 50 acres out somewhere, assuming there has to be some kind of infrastructure nearby to be able to plug in and make it commercially viable without, building out all that infrastructure just for that project.
Yeah, great questions. Here's how I look at it, and I will share it from the lens of community solar. So there are different opportunities within the commercial solar space, but we operate in co-development in community solar. And so, for example, some of our markets are New York, Illinois, Maryland. These are all states that have active community solar legislation. They're growing. And really, there's a big opportunity for land investors to get involved. I also shared that solar leasing is also an exit strategy. It's not a magic silver bullet that solves everybody's problems. And so oftentimes, people come to us and they're like, hey, I want to get started. What does this look like? And I share with them that this cannot be your only exit strategy. If you're only purchasing a property, assuming it's going to work out for solar leasing, that is a bad idea. And really how we look at it is that, with community solar, the good news is that it is working at an utility level. So, Ameren is the utility where I live down in St. Louis in Southern Illinois. So if we're looking at land in Southern Illinois to build a solar farm, anybody in that Ameren utility zone, which is basically from the halfway point of Illinois down, can participate in this farm. It can be 100 miles away. It doesn't matter, because what's actually happening is in community solar, that clean energy is not going back into that business. It's actually just going back into the greater energy grid. Mm-hmm. And they're receiving a bill credit in exchange for basically pledging the amount of energy they use to be developed and generated on that solar farm. So the good news is it could be anywhere as long as it's in the utility grid. And typically what we're looking for, some of the parameters are, 45-ish acres. We could do it with as little as 30, but preferably 30 to 45 is a great site that allows us to do a max build of, what's considered 5 megawatt hours, which is, basically 35-ish acres of panels with a fence around it. And, we're looking for flat land, cleared land, but really the other considerations that make the most meaningful impact are going to be what's called the substations, which is where these facilities interconnect into the grid. And you'll drive by substations all the time. They're basically the towers with, the fence around them where the utility lines plug into. Those need to be upgraded and suited for solar. There needs to be phase 3 power lines, which allows the solar generation to go through and travel through the utility. And really the last consideration are all of the studies that kind of go into this. And when we think about helping land investors or people with land, we'll do direct mail campaigns very similar to other, land investing strategies, or we'll do a lot of podcasting and people will call us and say, hey, will you look at my land? We do all of this work turnkey because I don't expect people to find utility maps, figure out the substation, find out how much solar is available to develop. We do all of this turnkey. We don't charge anybody to do it just because, efficiency is a core value of ours. If people are interested in it and they want to submit their land to us, we have a whole GIS team that will do all the work. And within 7 days, we'll be able to say like, hey, this looks good, or, this isn't going to work for XYZ. But the big piece here is that, everything could look good. It could be flat, could be right next to a substation, ideally less than a mile. It's got the phase 3 lines. You're good to develop. But regardless of all of those, there needs to be basically, 12 to 18 months of studies, interconnection and utility studies, environmental studies, and all sorts of different stuff to make sure that this is viable. And again, the reason why I share that it's just an exit strategy is if everything looks good and you purchase a property, but there's a freaking endangered squirrel species that like lives on the property, like they'll throw the deal out and it's done. Yeah. And so, we've experienced that before, which is crazy. Definitely not the call that you want to get over a squirrel, but again, like that's the point of sustainability is like we're preserving ecosystems, and it's not just about revenue generation and profits. And so that's kind of like the intro to how I kind of see the solar leasing opportunities. We're looking for raw, clear land, and my team will be able to take a look, especially if they're in those markets. New York, Illinois, and Maryland are all on fire right now. We've got about we've got 5 properties. We're going into co-development right now. We plan on building those properties, basically getting permission to, it's called NTP, notice to proceed. So this is actually before you build it. And then, we're probably going to flip those properties to, higher level solar developers that actually want to build it out, energize them. And then we'll run our brokerage and really help fill those solar farms. So we're trying to vertically integrate in this process. We started off just being brokers and selling the energy on those farms. Then we kind of went down a step and got into development. We have a partner that manages these projects long term. And for us, we're just trying to be involved in the full cycle of these solar projects.
Yeah, it's a great strategy. And I'm curious, and maybe I'll put a pin in this question, but like let's talk a bit about multifamily as an opportunity. I think a lot of our listeners and some of our even personal network invest in either passively in some multifamily deals or are active partners running multifamily deals. We were talking a little bit before we hit record, but some of these multifamily investment cycles are in 5 to 6, max 7 years, where they have an exit strategy to add some value, resell the property, and extract those profits back to the investors, which can be limiting from somebody looking at longer term investments. But how is that working if you're familiar at all with multifamily properties and kind of the business case around that? And I'm aware of the fact that it's going to vary market to market depending on the state and even the county and the incentives that they're willing to offer. But let's maybe take a good case for it.
Yeah, happy to. I recently spoke on the CRE.org, the Counselors of Real Estate. And, this was a group of some of the most prominent commercial real estate advisors in the world. And we were talking about all things sustainability, ESG, as it relates to a lot of things like multifamily assets. And the way that I see it is, again, you want to look at efficiency and OpEx reductions no matter what. That may look like commercial solar opportunities, but some of our strategic partners are in lighting, retrofits, HVAC, auditing. There's so many. There are literally so many opportunities to get an ROI on your, in this case, multifamily asset just by looking at operating expense reduction strategies. And most of them don't cost you anything. So like, for example, you could have an auditor come in, which, we're partnered with one of the largest in the country, and we'll basically send them in. They'll do some sort of study and they may find like, oh, you have this meter that's being overcharged on electricity, or, oh, you can split this into, 2 different electric meters in the building and you'll end up saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, you really don't know until you look. And so part of our value add process is to, when we have conversations with people, maybe they're in a great commercial solar market, maybe they're not. Maybe they're in an area with community solar where, again, there is automatic OpEx reductions. They don't need to install solar on site. The ROI is infinite from day one because they're not investing anything and they're immediately getting a payback. There are those opportunities that end up being home runs, kind of like the one that I had talked about. But, in the case where there's not, and you don't want to do something like on-site solar, which may have, an 8-year payback with a 5-year syndicate cycle, which just doesn't work. And so I wouldn't, recommend that, of course, either. But I would recommend exploring different types of efficiency and OpEx reduction strategies. And again, if people don't know where to go for that, for some of that stuff, I encourage them to reach out to me. I'm happy to make referrals. We have partners all over the country, as I had mentioned. A lot of people down in Texas doing some really cool efficiency projects. Like Texas is a market that we want to get in. I know it's really popular for, obviously real estate investing for many reasons, but it's a market that doesn't have our kind of community solar legislation that really kind of opens up. So there are opportunities everywhere. And that's how I would really look at it, is still from the sustainability perspective, definitely from the efficiency perspective, but maybe not necessarily, automatically going to what we do in the community solar or commercial solar space, unless it's really in like New York, Illinois, Maryland, some of the markets that we're, actively developing in.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm glad you opened that up because, as multifamily investors, we also have benefited from a more holistic audit, as you said, where somebody can come in and look at, what kind of lighting is around on the property, or even the water usage or the metering or different things. And it may not be as you would think about sustainability being, oh, let's just put green energy on site and enjoy that. There can be many other low cost or even no cost to the operator ways to look at it.
Yes,
it's good stuff. So I guess I'm going to be mindful of time here. This has been some great stuff. You've mentioned people that could get in touch with your various services. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you should they want to follow up or hear more about community solar, or even more broadly, just sustainability?
Yeah, so I post a lot of content. It's funny because I consider myself a content creator now. I encourage people to follow me and connect with me on LinkedIn. So that's just linkedin.com/in/Dakota Malone. I talk about all things sustainability through the 4 pillars, but I also talk a lot about, just sustainability practices, creating content in general, and using content as a sustainability strategy for your business as well. And I'm happy to talk about any and all of those subjects. Again, from anybody looking to enhance their mindset, empower themselves in a more meaningful way, or really, talk about the business use cases of sustainability and some of the stuff that you can do to improve your business, enhance it, add more value to your customers. And so that's why I encourage people to come find me.
Awesome.
Great.
We'll get that in the show notes.
Yes. We like to end each episode with gratitude. Is there anybody that you would like to shout out? It doesn't have to be just one person, but that has been instrumental to your life and where you are today.
I'll give a shout out to my fiance, who I need to call immediately after this.
Hey.
She just recently got a new job. And so, she was actually someone who was a product of the foster care system growing up. And, she now works for the state of Missouri, helping older youth in the foster care system. So she's had a very full circle moment, and it's been really healing for her. And she recently took a new job outside of the state, but still integrating into the foster care system, working with those older youth. And we recently got engaged in Costa Rica. And, I'm super proud of her, and I'm super grateful because, she really holds it down for us. And, I work remote. And so when we were thinking about, where do we want to live, I wasn't going to ask her to step out of her role and doing what she loves. And I was like, I work off my laptop. So, that was the 41st time I've moved when I came down to St. Louis to be here. And so, shout out to my fiance, Heidi.
Very nice. Congratulations on your engagement.
Yes.
And
thank you so much.
I appreciate you coming on the show. Your journey is inspiring in so many ways. Just, your personal triumphs over health issues and your outlook on life, and the way that you continue to push yourself and be curious and embrace different things. I'm inspired and love all of that. So I do really thank you for coming on the show and sharing some wisdom. And I do encourage you to write that book that's in the back of your head. It sounds like a lot of information there. It sounds like it could be 3 or 4 or 5 books, but pleasure getting to know you. And thanks again for coming on the show, Dakota.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, guys.
Yes,
you bet.
Thank you.
For those of you joining us today, we hope you enjoyed this time in the Champions Corner as much as we did. Got some awesome takeaways, and most importantly, will take action to continue living your best life and maximizing your potential. Mindset is such an important aspect of life, and when coupled with action, delivers undeniably powerful results.
Please subscribe to the podcast to hear from more great guests and get the latest mindset mastery insights and cash flow matchups.
Again, thank you so much for investing your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Cash Flow Fight Club podcast.